Leader Nancy Pelosi. I want to thank all of you, advocates, organizers, friends, families, for being here today. Now, over the years, we've gathered to celebrate Pride Month, and I've told you about what we can accomplish. I told you that the civil rights of LGBT Americans.
President Obama, release all LGBT communication centers. President Obama, stop the torture of the President Obama, I'm a trans woman. I'm tired of you. I'm tired of the woman. President Obama stopped the detention
What a juxtaposition. Thank you so much for coming here. Thank you for your patience. I know we ran into some technical difficulties. My name is Bishoy, and I'm here to introduce the PSU, an independent student-run organization committed to promoting open dialogue on campus, and we are very honored to have Jennicet Gutiérrez with us tonight. We'll start with some context. Last May, after 2 murals were vandalized, and we saw backlash to peaceful die-ins, Claremont students marched in support of Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter Claremont was formed. In a bold demonstration against sexual violence, the class of 2015 stood and turned their backs on President Oxtoby during graduation. And now, in light of new campus policies seeking to limit the critical praxis of resistance, this conversation, this event is all the more important. Please join me in welcoming Ariel Hernandez Ramirez, who will be introducing Jennicet. Ariel is the head of the Trans, Non-Binary, and Genderqueer Alliance, and a Black Latina trans woman of color who is fighting for the safety of queer trans people of color, specifically trans women of color on this campus. And here to bring us in is Ariel.
So last June, Jennicet Gutiérrez disrupted President Obama's Pride celebration to call attention to the violation of trans people held in immigration and customs enforcement detention centers. Our government is illegally holding hundreds of immigrants, among them 75 trans women. These people were held captive in detention centers without any regard to their gender identity. And they were being sexually abused 5 times more often than other detainees. After Jennicet's demonstration, the White House ordered that detainees be kept in centers according to their gender identity. Even though Jennicet's action worked, she was called a heckler. All of this goes to show that sexual violence, ethno-nationalism, imperial capitalism, and white supremacy act together. For us at the intersections and for our allies, resistance is not just a call for action. It's a way of communal healing and coalition building. Our existence is resistance. Here to speak about the politics of respectability and critical resistance is the head of Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement, TQLM, Jennicet Gutiérrez.
Good evening, folks. Thank you everyone for having me here today. I am honored to be able to come into spaces where my message will be heard and my voice won't be shut down. So it is an honor to be here. I'm thankful to the Pomona Students Union for, that's right? Yes. Just to make sure I give credit for bringing me on campus. My name is Jennicet Gutiérrez. I am a trans Latina activist. I live in Los Angeles, and what an honor to be here with so many amazing people that for some of you will be, leaders in our communities. So I'm just, thankful. I just came back from an event in Michigan. Kalamazoo College invited me. There was this somewhat competition in relation to grassroots organizations throughout the world. Basically, they wanted to kind of provide a prize to many amazing people who are involved in activism and really challenging any kind of oppression, right, against specific communities. So out of 83 participants, they selected 10 finalists, and I am very proud and honored to say that Familia took the top prize. But seriously, I just wanted to start with the video, right? Because I'm sure most of you have seen it or heard through the mainstream media with ABC only pretty much capture what Obama was saying, and my voice was kind of silent or removed completely. But what a just a position, right? Like, let's celebrate Pride here. So, we don't want to get into politics and interrupting the most powerful, right? So let's just skip that video and get to the good part, right? So that was a good technical visual there. So basically, I want to start with a quote from one of my idols, and I think someone who truly inspired me to get into this space and being able to get through the hostile environment that I was put myself through. And I want to quote Sylvia Rivera, and I quote, "I was a radical, a revolutionist. I am still a revolutionist. I am glad I was in the Stonewall riot. I remember when someone threw a Molotov cocktail, I thought, my God, the revolution is here. The revolution is finally here," and unquote. So Sylvia Rivera was someone who started basically our movement of resistance, right? She was a transgender woman of color who along her best friend, Marsha P. Johnson, another amazing activists who don't really get enough credit or are completely erased from our history. and the contribution that we play a role in really advocating for our rights and speaking out against injustices that we're facing. So to me, Sylvia really symbolized this and the spirit that it is needed in our times, with so many regulations taking place. And as Bishop, excuse me if I pronounce your name, but he mentioned in the introduction, you guys are dealing with regulations and restrictions on how you can pretty much guarantee your freedom of speech to a certain extent, right? Like, it's so necessary, but obviously structures and power doesn't want that to happen. So to me, getting ready for this interruption was not an easy thing to do. It was extremely difficult. Being a transgender woman of color, it's extremely difficult as it is. The violence that we are facing in our community, it's in 2015, we're still, the rate of transgender women who have been brutally murdered, we are at 20. And these are the figures that are only reported, right? So we're not really including others who are facing violence and are being kicked out of their homes for being transgender or gender non-conforming. So we are really in a crisis for our community. So to me, and in addition to that horrendous statistics, we have our annual income is $10,000 if we're lucky to even have a job, right? So it's just, to me, it's completely unacceptable, and that's why I needed to speak up on behalf of the community, not just on the undocumented community, but in the transgender community, especially transgender women of color. And Sylvia also said at one point, when luckily we have another amazing researcher, transgender woman of color, who Reina Gostat, who kind of during her research found a clip of Sylvia Rivera when she took center stage at a Pride celebration in New York City back in 1969, when she just stormed on stage and without, just took over the mic without any permission or being included in the program and demanded to be heard. And she was speaking out against the police brutality that our community was facing at that time. And also, in that specific time, even when you were assigned a specific sex at birth, it was like against the law to even wear any garments that didn't match your gender identity that you were assigned at birth. So it was a very, very difficult situation, and the 60s also brought a lot of resistance, something that we really don't have at this point. But hopefully with the Black Lives Matter movement, it's creating a phenomenal amount of activism in the US and around the world. So it's truly been an inspiration. But so to me, it became a critical opportunity to interrupt President Obama during his speech on behalf of the undocumented trans and queer LGBTQ people suffering daily in immigrant detention centers. And it wasn't an issue that just came overnight. As a member of Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement, we have been working, our organization is going to be 2 years old, but we have been working on this issue with other organizations who are working around the immigration issue, especially in Arizona. There is Puente Human Rights Organization, and also Mariposas Sin Fronteras, who specifically wants to bring this issue to the mainstream. So we have done already work, right, through different ways to reach the administration and the president that our brothers and sisters are facing harsh treatment. And we have an amazing compañera right here, Jessica, who is a transgender woman from Guatemala, and she fled her country because she was being harassed. When she decided to, I don't want to speak for her, but I just want to say these are the injustices that we're facing, right? Like she didn't have the support, so she was being harassed daily by the police back home. So she wanted to seek a better future for herself. So she comes into the border, U.S.-Mexico border, and turns herself in a detention center. And what happens when she's there? First thing, she's misgendered, right? Like they go by the documentation, and you could have all the procedures you need to do to align your mind with your body. And for some of us, right, we'll do that. But still, the authorities won't respect that. They'll go by what the documentation states. So that's one already, your humanity, it's already been questioned and taken away from you. So then what's the next step? They get put into the detention center. So what happens? She was detained in Arizona and then transferred to Santa Ana. The Santa Ana Police Department has a division where they do house different people who are in the process of seeking political asylum or any other cases. They have a section for the LGBTQ community. So the officials are there just making fun of them and like turn around, let me see your breasts, and physically really assaulting them. And sometimes they get even sexually assaulted, and not only by the officials, but also by other people who are in detention centers as well. So to me, that was a critical moment, and I came into Familia because to me the name is captures something that is missing so actively in our times, right? Like you have Familia, so as a Latina that just drew me in, and then you have trans. So it was the first term after Familia. Again, trans was always being put to the back and basically thrown under the bus, right? And then queer, liberation. To me, that is so critical because in order to really see any change in our LGBTQ communities, we need to work on our liberation and not in assimilation. Because historically, we have been tried different means and it's really not making any difference, especially for a transgender woman of color. And in similar lines, another case was the Familia got behind was Marichuy, another transgender woman from Mexico who was in detention center for 1.5 years and also facing similar conditions that she was, misgender, sexually abused, physically abused, and to us, it was a moment how can we get behind this issue? And going back to the presentation that just came back from Michigan, one of the comments we received is like, your organization is doing the most difficult work, right? And in reference to the undocumented community, we're adding 2 layers of complexity to our lives, right? We have our gender, sexual identity, then we have our immigration status. For so many people, the moment they know you're undocumented, you're out of the conversation. Like you have no business discussing, you're breaking the law, you're a criminal. So see, it's just taking so much from us. And that's why I just had to raise my voice at that specific moment. So though intentional, my action was about continuing to place trans immigrant women at the front lines of our trans liberation movement. It was the result of an urgent need for my community to collectively lift our voices and bring visibility, and to denounce the dire conditions trans women of color face daily. In addition, I was trying to bring to light undocumented trans women facing serious injustices and the horrific and inhumane conditions they are facing in detention centers. So let me take you back to my life. Why was it also all these injustices drew me to that moment to interrupt the most powerful men on earth, right? I come from a very humble background. I was born in Mexico to a single mother who she herself had to face a lot of rejection in her life. She married We, belong to a Catholic family. And my mother married her husband, and she was actually going through education, but my grandma pulled her out of education and said, your role as a woman is to be a housewife and take care of your husband. So my mother started to take care of, helping my grandma at the house. So then what happens 6 children later, her husband just makes the decision to leave and said, I'm going up north. But he didn't come to the US. He settled in Tijuana, and he said, I will be sending financial assistance for the children, to take care of the children, but that financial assistance never got to my mother. So she was really struggling to find, to bring food to the table and to keep a shelter under our roof and not really become homeless. So then my father comes into the picture. He was a police officer, and he met my mother. And then my mother, she needed help, and he was an officer, so it's a little more, they had more steady income and had 3 children. So I tell people that, to me, like, even before I was born, I was already rejected, right? Because my grandma puts my mother through, again, a woman had to put up with all this social injustices, in my opinion. So we started to grow up and everything, and I remember my mother telling me, like, go to your grandparents' house, but make sure your grandma doesn't see you whenever we have to bring food to us so she can feed her children. And I remember sneaking through the house and just being really afraid of my grandmother, that she would see me sneaking out with food, because I didn't want her to be any more mad at my mom than she already was. And I remember in the 50-year anniversary of my grandparents, my mother was in the back, and she was like really crying for 3 hours before the picture was taken, because my grandmother like stopped talking to her for like years and wouldn't talk to her. So that was one action that I had to go through and overcome later in life, right? But then as I started to grow up, I was like already starting to explore my sexual attraction. Ever since I've been conscious of my existence, I've always felt a strong attraction for the same sex, right? Even as young as 4 or 5 years old, as far as I can go back and recollect any memories that I have in my life. So that was one dilemma that I had to started to develop these feelings, right, of attraction. And then we add more to that, which is my gender identity. I remember going to a neighbor's house, and I was as young as 8 years old. And they put a wig on, a dress, and heels and nylons, and I was just so happy. Like, it was a feeling of like this freedom, right? Like, I felt so liberated, and I didn't think anything of being controversial or being different. To me, it was just the most normal thing. But obviously society doesn't see it that way. And they took a photo and they gave it to me, and I was so happy and proud of that photo that I showed it to an older friend of mine who identified as a gay man, and he just totally like told my sister, and then my sister to my mother, and it was just like really a big no, like, don't you ever dare to go to the house, you're prohibited. But I didn't listen, I still continued to go. And so I decided to explore, and I knew that at a very young age that I didn't know what the term was. But once I came to the US at the age of 15 and started to connect with other members of the LGBT community, mostly Latinas, because I didn't know English at the time. So I needed to kind of find that kind of support, right, of a chosen family. And we started to go out on the weekends, and I started to dress up, and I just started to explore that identity more and more. And then I started to kind of educate myself on, and then when I heard transgender for the first time, I was like, yeah, that's basically who defines who I am, the term, right? And it wasn't easy. It was a very difficult decision to make at a personal level, not only because I was just coming to terms with who I was as a transgender woman, but also having to hide my immigration status, right? My mother was like, okay, well, Finally, one day I called my sister and I said, I can't take this anymore. I'm really depressed, and I have to make this transition. And then she said, well, just take your time. We'll process our information. So my obligation and responsibility was to tell my mom and my brothers and sisters, and now you tell your children how you want to approach this issue to them. And it took a lot of difficult conversations and a lot of pain, a lot of crying, a lot of arguments, a lot of disagreements. But now I can finally say that I am thankful that they have, they support my journey and fully embraced my identity. But also on the same side, I know that for many of us, the reality it's not supportive, right? We're being kicked out of the homes, denied access to employment, and so many more complex issues. But not knowing that all of that, I guess part of going back to those difficult memories in life, it's in a way I was acting on my own resistance, right? On the resistance that tells me that you have every right to exist, you have every right to live, and you have every right to be happy. So to me, transitioning and becoming a transgender woman is my own act of resistance. So that's the sexuality and gender piece, and now we come immigration, right? We have, when George Bush came into office, he promised to do an immigration reform. And actually, I was younger at the time, and I had all the relatives that were undocumented, but they didn't belong to the LGBTQ community, but they were waiting for that reform so they can change their immigration status. But then what happens? September 11, 2001, it changed the whole dynamics of politics, right? And we can go into what happened after that, but you can really say that the undocumented community is the one that took the biggest hit. Because I remember being so happy because my relatives were like, oh yeah, he's really dealing with this issue with Congress and the House of Representatives, so we are going to have a reform, and we've been waiting for years. So we are already working, but we're in the shadows, right? We cannot complain, because any conditions we are dealing with at work, we have to put up with them because we have no other choice. We have no higher education, we have no skills to develop any other kind of work, right? So then the abuses start happening, and then 9/11 hit, and any hopes of the immigration reform collapsed. Yes, they just came down, and up to this day, we're still not have the reform other than what Reagan did in the 80s. And through a lot of pressure of young activists and the undocumented, the dreamers, they're the ones that actually inspire me. And I remember when the first time a group of them, young students, went down to the border and crossed the border in an act of civil disobedience and said, we're part of this, the fabric of America. We've been going to school, we're trying to get ourselves and that opportunity to succeed, but then what happens after we finish, right? So they started to put pressure, and because of that, it kind of like already started to raise my own political consciousness and said, I need to be active in the community, because if I don't do it, who is going to do it for me? And so finally, when I came to terms with who I was, I remember my mother would tell me, like, make sure you don't tell anyone, don't trust anyone with your immigration status, because you just never know who you might tell, and they might turn that information, and then you can start the deportation process. So this is all the pressure that we have to deal with on their daily lives. So to me, going back to the Michigan experience and seeing these amazing organizations that they just bring more fire to my activism, right? We had an organization from Uganda who's really fighting and educating through hip hop different groups in their city where they were representing, and saying we're gonna use this music to mobilize the youth, because it is in the youth that we have the future, right? And just seeing that was another awakening to me. And then also we had this organization from Colombia who General Motors established a company there, but the pay was very low. The workers were being injured, and one of the presenters actually injured at work and now has to get medical care for the rest of his life, and GM denied access to that. So they're working and resisting, right, fighting not only the companies that are being based there, but also the government and different powerful institutions. And then we had another organization from Mexico who were two indigenous Mexican women who, again, they're fighting the patriarchy, they're fighting sexism, right? They're fighting classism, and they're saying, we just cannot let these abuses take anymore. We cannot take this anymore. So they were like, being around this community was just very, very uplifting. I know that if these people are doing it with very limited resources, why can we, that we have a lot of privilege in this country? Why are we going to allow the government institutions silence our every right to protest in every way that we feel is necessary? It's not like we're gonna just get up and do it because we want to do it, right? We have to strategically plan, and what is it that we want to challenge? So basically, I just also want to say that we, the undocumented trans women immigrants, we have hopes, we have dreams, and we are leaders, and we are integral part of the movement. When we face with gendercide, deportation, and rape and abuse in detention centers, politeness is a luxury that transgender women of color cannot afford. It is well known by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, and President Obama that trans women are often sexually abused while in detention. See, this is going back to that, the means of saying getting involved with these other organizations that were already pushing through diplomatic ways to get this message to the president and the administration. And nothing was done. So basically what my point is also, activists should not be concerned about respectability politics. The interruption at the White House was not about Jennicet. It is about the continuous state section violence and oppression my community faces every day. It is about the silence inflicted upon us by the media and mainstream LGBTQ organizations. And as you can see in that video, my own community turned their back on me, right? And I keep saying this to people, why would it happen if at least, I was saying 10, but I'm gonna say 5, because I think 10 is a high number. But what would happen if 5 other people would have joined my voice and really demanded Obama to address my issue, right? I'm fortunate to tell you that Angela Peoples, an amazing organizer from Get Equal, was the person who was recording this alternative video. And the moment I said, because the action was intentional. It wasn't that, okay, I'm just gonna go in and do it, right? Like, we planned into it. So one of the conversations we had, I told Angela, when I say no one more deportation, that's at that point that I want you to join me. And you can hear her voice, and she did join, and I am very thankful. I'm grateful that she did so. So there is hope, Even I'm gonna just talk briefly about planning this action, right? Like, the Familia got a call a week before June 24th and said, would you be willing to do a direct action at the White House? I wasn't part of the conversation at the beginning, but they say we are looking for a trans woman who is undocumented and who will be willing to do this. And it was a conversation with, I'm not sure how many people, and then my name came up. And then the next time they reached out to me and they said, you know, this is gonna happen. I was already being visible in the community through different interruptions that we were bringing awareness to the violence transgender women of color were facing. So I was already pumped up. I was already active in the community, right? So without hesitation, I say, yes, let's do this. But I had to disclose some information to them first, like, you know, I haven't legally changed my name. My immigration status is still, you know, in place. And not only that, but I have a criminal record, right? Unfortunately, I admit it because if we do want to see the challenges that we face, I think transparency is important. And I also understand that not everyone is willing to open about their past because it's very, very, it triggers a lot. If you're making progress in your healing, when you open up and disclose the pieces of your life, it opens the wounds and it opens any progress. But I'm not ashamed to speak because part of that was through like heavy drinking that I got myself into because I couldn't embrace my whole being of who I am as a trans woman, as an undocumented. So I had to find ways to numb that pain that I was dealing with. But I told them, this is what's up, this is on the table, so no worries, we'll do the rest. So they provided that information to the White House, and then the White House was like, actually, it was a conflict too. There was another organization that I don't really want to name because I think creating conflict, it kind of benefits the enemy, right? So we need to remain in solidarity and face challenges that we have because at the end of the day, it is our communities that all we have. So this organization was like, you know, at first it was gonna be me and a transgender woman from El Salvador. But she had just won her political asylum case a month early. And she was really scared. Like El Salvador is serious business, you know? And she wasn't even involved. All she knows, she's an activist and she wants to continue to raise awareness of how difficult they're facing it back home. And when I finally got to be on the call with everyone, she wasn't even informed that the interruption was taking place. And but then she said, yes, I'll do it. So without getting any other confirmation from the White House whether if I was going to be allowed in, I flew to DC. And when I got to DC, it was just like June 23rd. I landed in DC, I met up with the organizations, and we just like, it was really hot that day. It was like really, really hot. And I remember like, I was so nervous and shaking and am I gonna get through? And I told the person that was with me, so did we get clearance for me to go in? And so I didn't really have any time to process what was gonna happen, right? Am I gonna succeed in this action? Is it gonna be denied access? So our organization is gonna kind of start a different kind of campaign, right? Like transgender woman denied access to the White House and things like that. So finally, we get the confirmation call the night before. And once we did that, we walked right outside the White House because I just wanted to start getting myself prepared for the action. And just being right outside this, space, it was just very, very intimidating. Right? And then finally, I go back to the place. I'm having last minute conversations with people. I'm like, don't do it this way, don't do it. Like, it was really, really heavy. So at the last moment, it was left to me. Even the day off, they were trying to persuade me not to do it, right? Like, you should just let President Obama speak. And then after he's done, you can walk to him and just deliver the letter. And at that point, you can scream and you can do whatever. But they were trying to set up meetings with this leader in DC who's a trans woman from El Salvador also, and a different one, not the one I mentioned a minute ago, but she has really good relations with the community there, and they were trying to set meetings, and I was getting my hair done. I remember at the salon, and then I get a call, and they're like, Jennicet, can you meet this person? And I was like, I'm getting my hair done, still 20 more minutes. Okay. And then like, okay, once you're done, go to the office, get ready, and then you meet up with that downstairs. And then sure enough, I get that call. Instead, you already know, I'm looking for my high heels, you know. Just trying to find, because I knew the urgency. I knew that our community is suffering. I know that the violence is increasing. I know that discrimination is happening as we have these conversations here, right? Someone is being denied housing, someone is being denied anything to eat. It's being, using transphobic comments and just looking at you, and it was just like, something in me told me you have to speak up and challenge power. So when I went into this house, into the White House, I was just like, thinking about Sylvia Rivera. I'm like, oh, Sylvia Spirit, please come to me. And Marsha P. Johnson, how do you find your strength? How do you resist? How did you survive this hostile society that we live in, And I think at that moment, even the night before, I went to the bathroom and I was just like, do I want to do this? So I go through it. And my mother tells me, like, we're in this country without documentation, so you have to be respectful and especially treat people how you want to be treated, and especially if it's someone else's home, right? You don't want to be disrespectful and things like that. So it's just like so much going on. Up to this day, I'm still processing, and I'm still not really like, how did I do that, But I think at that specific moment when I challenged President Obama, I think all this abuse and oppression that communities of color, that LGBTQ communities of color and transgender women, I think their spirit somehow entered me and gave me that strength that I needed to challenge President Obama. And I think most importantly, to challenge white supremacy. Power should always be interrupted when given the opportunity, especially from people who are supposed to be powerless. I believe that in this act of resistance, I have found my liberation. For many years, I lived in shame of being a transgender woman of color, shame of being undocumented. Now that I have released my chains of shame, I want my beloved undocumented trans and queer community to find their own power and liberation. This is the vision I see for my community. By interrupting power, we manifest liberation. Being transgender and being undocumented are interpreted to mean powerless. But while we speak truth to power, the powerless have an opportunity to challenge oppression. It is in this rare opportunity of a lifetime and of confrontation that I have found and regained my strength. In conclusion, I have a vision that our community will continue to unite and show our power. We all must develop a vision of change and leadership and commit to acts of resistance. We must not assimilate into a system that wants to destroy our vision, and our movement must be led by the voices most marginalized. Thank you. Q&A session. I do want to show this piece of art that an artist from San Francisco, a trans man himself, reached out to me and said, is it okay if I have your permission to do a piece? And I said yes. And I looked up his work. He did pieces of Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, C.C. McDonald, another amazing social freedom fighter. And I brought some copies, so if anyone is interested, you can take one of these with you. And we're asking like 15 apiece or 2 for 20, and all the funds will go to Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement to continue to do the work that needs to be done. Okay? Thank you.
We're going to field open Q&A. Jennicet will field.
Any questions, comments? Okay.
The Queer Resource Center at the Bi-States has enacted a lot of violence towards trans people and other queer communities of color at the criminal colleges. It's been really hard as a work community with trans women, I guess, seeing this violence firsthand, organize against this. I guess, what is your advice to, people here, or like, the people who don't, really understand what, the people who are seeing this violence, the future of, your organization?
Thank you for that question. Did everyone hear back there? Okay. She was asking that here on campus, the QRC Center also has a lot of hostile environment, especially transgender women of color. So she wants to know what will be my advice to basically confront, right, the center and bring these injustices. Again, going back into my interruption, it's clear that there is this disconnect with our community, right? The video, if the video is there, it's not like I'm just making it up. There is evidence to show that it is the reality for the transgender community, that we are being pushed aside, right? And then you cannot let this, find ways for them to just, whatever issues they feel that should be done, even just misgendering you, that is an act of violence, and it's being told by many transgender people, right? And sometimes we deal with that. I think another community that it's even our community trans leaves out is the gender non-conforming people, right? And also that we need to find ways to communicate. But one thing is like, unfortunately, we are dealing in very different political places, a different environment, and it's like, for me, I just refuse to be silenced, right? Like, if I go into the center and I said I'm a transgender woman and I'm facing this and nothing is done, I'm gonna go back to my community and knock and continue to bring people to my issue, and as a group come and voice that concern. And if that doesn't happen, then I will find ways to strategize and do even interruptions within our own center. I was in my very first participation in the Creating Change. Is everybody familiar with Creating Change? It's organized by the National Task Force community, and they have an annual where they bring different organizations from the LGBTQ. Even we had to interrupt in Denver, the main plenary speech, where the mayor of Denver was going to come on stage and welcome everyone and saying Denver, it's a very friendly LGBTQ city. But there were two issues that were happening at the time. It was the Denver police killed Jessie Hernandez, someone who identified, as queer or gender conforming, or maybe trans. I'm not really sure, but she was a member of the community and a person of color, and she was gunned down by the police. And also we were facing a lot of murders that were taking place. I believe at that time were like 10 murders that were reported. So we organized with other people in the community, and I'm so glad that you're here, because I do want to connect with you and see how Familia can help challenge the QRC here in campus, right? And work together, because I think that support is necessary, right? And the video shows one sole voice speaking out, but behind that voice there was a group of people that supported the action, and I was able to deliver and interrupt the president. But yeah, we turned the stage, and we forced actually the mayor cancel his speech as a result of that. And it was an interesting thing to do, because the moment we stormed on stage, what the organization did, they shut the lights down on us by saying, you can do this, you need to get out, even though we're screaming, we're tired of the violence, we have to be part of the conversation, and things like that. No, they turned the lights off for like 15 seconds, but we didn't back down. We stood there, we took over the stage, and they had no option but to give us the mic. And then Bambi Salcido, another amazing organizer, activist here from LA, she gave this list. This is happening to us, these are the demands, right? And yeah, so I would just say continue to organize. If you need any support from Familia, we're here for you. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So in your speech, you mentioned how you really believe that creating conflict amongst ourselves, amongst people of color, benefits the enemy, and we need solidarity amongst ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So my question being here is that the people of color is already a small percentage of people here,
Mm-hmm.
but then there are also people of color here who don't benefit from the systems of structure at play, but still preach these respectability politics.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach these people when you're still trying to create solidarity amongst them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the reality is when some people have their minds set and they believe that respectability politics is the only way, I'm just not going to waste my time, with those people. I already told you this is not the way, and there's no other way. Okay, thank you, bye. But, I do believe the importance of solidarity. I myself, being a trans woman of color, I do believe that Black Lives Matter is really uplifting and bringing us back to the 60s, right, with the resistance and the influence that they're having in the political arena right now as we speak, and they're really forcing candidates to speak and debate on something they should be debating since the foundation of this nation, racial inequality, and I believe that co-opting movements, it's not a good way to do that. I don't want to bring someone who disagrees and then dissolve any kind of power that we have already established. So I do believe that creating your own movement and kind of finding ways, like Familia, for example, we're getting ready to have a gathering in Chicago, where we have reached out to Black Lives Matter, because we have to also challenge those people with the respectability politics, but we also have to deal with a lot of anti-Blackness in our own communities. You know what I mean? And how do we come to those difficult conversations and find ways to be part of a different movement? Because I do believe that the enemy is so strong. Coming one group, it's easy for them to destroy. I think having multiple movements, it's a better tactic to do the damage and see progress in society. So I remember doing this interruption, and a friend of mine was I was having a conversation with another trans woman, and then she's so girl, you should have just if I were you in that moment, I would have been why? What are you talking about? this is not for you. Why? Then when is the time, you know? And like challenge them, but I was like, yeah, I mean, you have a good point, but that's just not me. It's not Jennicet, you know, that's not my personality. It's not my way. My way was to, I think, by challenging Obama power in general, I think I was regaining my dignity and the dignity of the trans and queer community. And with that, we got a piece of humanity back. So continue to find ways, but yeah, if they just you know, I'm not gonna have a discussion with you about theories and discussions, and let's look at this in paper and then hand deliver the letter, you know, like no, that's been done already. I came into this movement as an activist, I want action.
Yeah.
Yes.
In your speech, you talked about the idea of healing. So I was wondering, like, different avenues for healing you sought out in your everyday life, or how you practice self-care in the face of so much hostility and violence.
Yeah, that's a very important question. Thank you for bringing that up. I think his question was like, I brought up healing, right, and self-care. I think sometimes I wasn't even aware of things myself. Someone asked, like, we as activists concentrate so much on action by not on the reflection. And part of the reflection is the healing process. Luckily, there is an organization here in LA called Bienestar, a Latino organization that provides services to LGBTQ community, mostly Spanish speaking, but they include other people there as well. So at one point they were not really addressing issues for trans women of color. But then finally with the pressure of other activists, they started to open that door, and I took advantage of that. Like I registered, I attended therapy sessions for 4 months prior to the interruption, and I think that really helped me to remain grounded in that moment of difficulty, right? Otherwise, I was having a conversation with this amazing group and dinner, and I was like, if I wouldn't had this help, I would probably like breaking down, and I could probably be like, you know what, I did it, I'm out of this, I'm going back into my private life, continue to hurt myself more and perhaps commit suicide. Because you know, when you deal with a lot of like transphobic comments, racist comments, and a lot of xenophobic comments, it's like, not everyone can take that, and people just really lose it. And part of that was that I was lucky enough to be able to, and then with the family support was essential also to be able, but if you don't have that family support biologically, I do recommend to find that chosen family support that understands you. Right, and even among that group, you need to differentiate the voices that really want to uplift you and help you thrive and do challenge and make a difference. But I've been through that torment that I went through when I talked about alcoholism, drugs use, and all these kinds of things. I think that was part of me preparing me for this moment. You know, like, you did it, you got it out of the way, now concentrate on yourself. So I did the therapy, I have the family that supports me now. I try to go to different groups when I know they're doing self-care, because I think it's an area that just being in that space and sharing and opening up, I think it's also important to do that. I try to remain a healthy balance of nutrition, exercise, and I know there's so much more work that needs to be done. So at this point, I do want to engage in more preparation for whatever comes next, for whatever challenge there is. Thank you.
We're going to have one more question, and then after that, we're going to have a short intermission to get out into breakout groups. And then Jennicet has a presentation for the workshop, and then the workshop will actually begin. So one or two more questions.
Yes, go ahead.
So I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody, but I think a lot of us as young activists are looking for a way to continue driving change on behalf of marginalized communities as we grow older and move into the professional world. And I was wondering if you had any like suggestions or like really any guidance.
If you really want to become an ally and reach out to those communities who are most impacted by oppression or who are most marginalized, do make an effort. You said it right, like I don't want to speak for them, like do make an effort to reach out and bring them in and let them amplify their voices. And I think it's crucial that the group that you want to be part of and support are part of the discussion and do really lead the way that we should be addressing concerns, right? And what is it that we're facing? And also, like, it's kind of a delicate line because you might identify the group, but again, not everyone might be ready to come into the center of attention or at the center of the discussion and kind of lead, right? So it's a process. It's a process, but you have to truly make an effort. Like when I started with Familia, I remember Bambi telling me, "Girl, I want you to get involved," but she didn't kept calling me or harassing me or telling me anything, right? Like it was just, once I hear this event is happening, I started to take the initiative to go. And then the co-founder of Familia, Jorge Gutiérrez, who was supposed to be with me but had to go to Phoenix, said he said, "Can I meet up with you on a certain day?" Because he already had this vision for Familia that they wanted to bring this specific issue of trans and queer detainees in detention centers and set up a meeting for breakfast. And I went and he told me about it. And I think those that call to someone that you might hear or is facing something, right? And be able to really reach out and do approach people with an open heart and open mind, because you want to be able to help them heal and come out instead of bringing them back down. And then it's going to be another statistics. You know? To me, it was so I used to be so shy, and now I can even believe I'm speaking in front of so many different amazing people, you know? I used to be really secluded, and we are under so much pressure that we have to conform to the gender binary. We won't even be heard, right? For instance, we have made a lot of visibility, but if you look at every trans woman who is visible, they feed a specific standard of beauty and a specific, right? And I had a conversation with one of my friends on Facebook who identifies as trans, is married, and can't really be open about it. And he said to me something that I never considered. Was Jennicet, you're getting attention because the way you look. If you would have been in a different phase of your transition, you wouldn't even probably gather as much attention as your action did. And you have to acknowledge that point and say, yeah, it's real talk right there, you know. But now, I guess with the help with everything and connecting with the right people, I'm not paying more surgeries, my voice sounds smelly, it's rough, I don't care, I already overcame so much struggle in my life. I'm not here to please your feelings or whatever you think I should be or whatever. So yeah, just reach out and do really put those people at the center whenever they're ready to speak. Thank you. Oh, one more question? Yeah.
Okay, so I know that a couple days ago there was a lot of there's a trend on social media about National Coming Out Day. So my question is about coming out. And I feel like I observed that it was mostly these white mainstream LGBTQ movement people who would celebrate this event publicly. So for you as a trans woman of color, I'm just wondering, does coming out of the closet mean liberation? And for you, how do you define liberation?
It's a good, complex question. Like, let's get into theory. Let's bring any gender, sexuality majors here that can help me. No, I think coming out and living your life authentically, it is, to an extent, a form of liberation. But it doesn't mean that because I came out and I'm living my life authentically, if I'm facing all these other challenges, it's incomplete. We really want to be able to walk down the streets freely without harassment, without someone turning, their faces at you or laughing, or, it's just, that's not the liberation I'm looking for. I want to be able to see someone and say, hi, how are you? Give me that opportunity to see the humanity behind their beauty of diversity, and that's something that's not happening right now. If you are something, we have incidents at TSA even harassing transgender women, especially if you don't fit a certain, right, the business so clearly. And then we have in California, as we speak, there is a group gathering signatures for the bathroom bill. So if there's any suspicions that you might be trans or gender non-conforming, you can be criminalized for just wanting to use the bathroom, right? And these accusations are so totally based on fear, and it works for them, right? So again, this coming out is not going to change these whole other layers that are keeping us oppressed. So truly challenge the system, get to the root of the problem, and that's something, unfortunately, this national coming out seems to say, oh, we have marriage. We were critical. We were critical of different powerful LGBTQ organizations, right, like the HRC, that spend tremendous amount of resources into marriage equality, right? And who's really benefiting marriage equality? If you look at a trans woman, how am I getting benefited when a man, society might see a relationship as invalid? That's one. And then the other thing, they might label him as gay. And there's so many issues that not many of them are willing to go through. So marriage is the least of our concerns. Survival is the critical piece, and so much talent is being destroyed by that. I was just another talk in Madison, and they had a very brilliant 16-year-old Asian American trans teen who committed suicide, Skylar Lee. His piece that he wrote on gender and sexuality got to be published at an international level. But what happens, because we don't have this liberation, he committed suicide. So now we lost a brilliant mind, right? And then we have, it's just organization fully. That's why that term drew me in. And this National Coming Out Day, I follow other people who really break it down, what it means, and again, yes, it's part of it, but it's not all of it. Thank you. Thank you everyone for showing up.